Hi everyone and welcome to another episode of Gaffer in Gear. This episode is a little bit gear review, but mostly a back to basics episode. So in today's episode, we're going to be having a look at this nets kit from Kupo. We're going to cover what the different colors mean. We're going to have a look at the different materials. We're going to cover the difference between a black net and a white net. We're also going to have tips for using these nets with soft lights and with hard light sources. Alright, so we'll get straight into the gear review, and for this I'm going to make the assumption that you know what a nets kit is. If you don't, just watch the rest of the episode and then come back to this. Alright, so the nets kit is sold in two sizes, the two most common sizes, so 18 inch by 24 inch. Now that sells for about 380 US dollars or 510 Australian dollars. And this is the 24 by 36 inch kit, which sells for about 500 US dollars or about 600 AUD. So let's go through what you get with that. So you get a very well constructed bag. Now the bag's quite solid here. I've got it leaning against a C stand. And as you can see, the bag's not bending or warping, so it's not going to bend or get your nets out of shape that way. Again, it's very solid, very well put together, zip sealed. Now inside the bag, you've got 6 sections, so all of your nets are stored separated, so they're not going to rub against each other and damage themselves that way. Now in the nets kit, you've got, what have we got here? We've got a single net in black, we've got a double black net, we've got a single net in white, a double white net, we've got a silk and a 1/4 silk. Now the nets are constructed as well as anybody else's, or as well as any of the top brands. So little details like here where the handle joins, you've got overlapping in the material, and it's heat sealed and sewn, so you're not going to get any sagging at that point over time. Little details like it's black anodized metal, so you're not going to get any reflections off it. That doesn't bother me so much because I'm going to be using it in a chromed C-stand anyway. Look, it seems to be just as good, just as much tension as you get out of the other brands. This is the double net, and as you can see, there's no sagging between the two nets. The only sort of criticism I have of the kit is that you can only put the nets in this way into the bag. You can't put them around that way into the bag. So my main concern with that is putting it into the bag and folding over the end here and having it stored with that fold in it, because that's one thing I hate with nets, when you get that overlap in the bag. But that's pretty much the only real criticism I've got. Look, I think in all honesty, you're paying for a bag at the price. You're paying, the bag's worth the money, and you're getting the nets chucked in for free. One thing I would like to see them do is have a nets kit with a few more sizes in it, not just one size of each kit. All right, so let's get into the basics now and go through what the nets do. But in order to explain a net, first we'll go through a solid. So a solid, or a cutter or a flag, is a solid material, as in you can't see through it. Okay, so when I put it in front of the light, it blocks all of the light out. Now the term cutter, if you come from a country where they use the term cutter, it means you can use it to cut the light, okay, and also flag the light. So that's what those two terms mean. All right, so now let's have a look at the net and have a look at the difference. So we'll have a look at black nets first, because they're easier to explain. All right, so this is a single black net. Now a single black net is symbolized by the green material. Now a single black net is one layer of bobbin. Now this is roughly half an f-stop. Okay, so the reason I say roughly is as they get older, they might sag and they might be a little bit less or a little bit more. All right, so when I put this in front of the light, it reduces the light level by half an f-stop. Okay, so we've got the full intensity coming through here. We've got half an f-stop coming through there, or half an f-stop less coming through the bottom there. So it doesn't cut the light completely, it just reduces the amount of light level. All right, so now let's take a look at a double net. So that's symbolized by red. Okay, so when you've got a net that's got red material, that's one f-stop. Okay, so let's put that in front of the light source there. And as you can see, it's cutting it by one f-stop, or halving the light that's coming through. Now, you don't get it in this kit, but also available, and they're not that common on set, is blue. So a blue is 2 f-stops of light reduction. So that's what these are for, nets, is for reducing light level. Now the white nets also reduce light level, but they have different optical characteristics. We'll get into that in a sec. So why on earth would we want to use a net when we could just use the dimmer in the light? Well, here's a scenario. Let's say we can't get this light any further back to give us an even exposure across our set. And we've got a person standing here. So imagine my hand's another person, and I'm standing here, and you want us to be both matching exposures. Now, this person's looking okay, but I'm too hot. So if we put a net in between me and the light, that reduces the light on me, but doesn't affect the person over here because they're lit by the light coming out the front. Okay, so that's the net there. That's the direct light. They're getting lit by that direct light. So now our exposures are getting pretty close to matching. The other way you can use a net is, say, on a background. Now the light is too close to this part, making that too bright, and that part down there is dimmer. So I can use the net to even out the exposure across the wall. Now, one thing I almost forgot to mention is this is called an open-end net. Okay, so what we mean by open-ended is we've got three ends that are sealed, okay, and this end here is open. It doesn't have a metal rod going through it. It's got a bit of wire taking up the tension and holding it together. So the most common place that I use an open-ended net is if we're doing sort of tabletop work or tabletop photography. So we might have a camera over the top pointing down and we've got somebody assembling something or doing a how-to video. Now in those sort of scenarios, we like to have a big soft light close to the table so that the soft light wraps over the top of the hands. But here's the problem, of course. The end of the table that's closest to the softbox is going to be hotter than the middle of the table or the far end of the table. And that's where the open-ended nets come in handy. So I just bring my net in to reduce the light level on one side of the table. Now, because it's an open-ended net, we don't get a hard shadow through the center. Now, here's the thing. This end of the table is lit by the light coming through the net. The far end of the table is getting lit by direct light coming off the softbox. And the middle has a nice graduation because it's getting soft light coming in over the top, plus the soft light coming through the net. So you can get a nice graduation of light across your surface. And being a soft light, you don't get any texture off the net. But what if we're using a hard light source? The closer we are to a light source, the softer the shadows. The further away we get from a light source, the harder the shadows get. Now let's do the same thing with the net. When I hold the net close to the light, it wraps around the open end, giving us a beautiful graduation. As I move the net further away from the light, we get harder shadows, and you can now make out the open end of the net. And when I move the net further away from the light, you can now see the texture of the net. Now let's use the same principles in reverse. Let's say we've got a hard light source over there. We're using a net to reduce the light level on me, but we're getting shadow texture off the net onto my face. Well, all we have to do is move the net further away from me or further away from the subject and closer to the light, and that'll soften off those shadows. But what if you can't move the net further away? What if the net has to be here? Now that's where your white nets can come in handy. Now this one's got a red tag that indicates that it's one f-stop or a double net. Now being white and not black means it has a little bit of diffusion quality to it. Just enough diffusion to get rid of the texture. Now I'm going to show you this by alternating between two nets. This is a white double net. This is a black double net. White double net, black double net. Now when I put the two nets one above the other, you can see that they've both got the same amount of light reduction. Now before you rush out and only buy white nets, there is something you need to be aware of. When light passes through a white net, it illuminates up the white surface, like it would if it was a normal diffusion. And that of course adds ambient light. Now to show the difference between the white and black net, I'm going to use a very fine slit of light. Have a look at what happens to the black parts of the screen when the white net is introduced. This is the black net. This is the white net. Black net, white net. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. You could use it creatively. For example, you might have a gobo pattern in your background. You could use a white net to readjust your contrast levels without having to introduce another light source. Where it could come in handy is on tabletop photography. Here we've only got the one light source, and we want hard shadows. But the shadows might be too dark and distracting. Using a white net, I can reduce the contrast ratio on those shadows. Now watch what happens to the contrast in the shadows when I move the net forward and backwards. The contrast changes, but the shadow maintains its shape. Now we've only got 2 more nets left to cover in the Kupo kit. So the first one I'll pull out is the white frame. So if you've got a white frame that has no color markers on it anywhere, it is usually a 1/4 strength silk. So a 1/4 strength silk has a light reduction of about half an f-stop, but it is a diffuser, so it will soften the edges on your beam. Now this is a very handy thing to use if you want to soften your beam edges. And the last thing left in the kit is the one with the yellow frame. So a yellow frame indicates a full strength silk. Now it's usually an artificial silk. So this will give you a light reduction of about 1.5 f-stops typically. Now this is a diffuser. So where I'd use something like this is if I need to diffuse a light but I can't get a blade frame into position. Also I'd use something like this over a downlight. Because it's on a C-stand and not taped to the ceiling, I can adjust the height up and down and readjust the size of my source. Okay, so before we go, a very big thank you to the Australian distributor of Kupo, which is Protog. So if you're interested in buying these products in Australia, go to protog.com.au. Okay, now before we go, somebody's bound to message, if I don't say it, that the light here I've got, which is a light matte spectrum, is gradable. So you can put a graduation through the unit via the ballast here. So yeah, that is the future of expensive top-end light panels. But one thing I've got to say is you're limited to the zones. Right? So if you've got a net kit, for example, you've got a lot more flexibility in where you can put the graduation, whereas something like this, you're limited to the 4 pixel zones or the 6 or 8 pixel zones that it has. But you know, somewhere down the track, we'll be able to do stuff like that without a net, at least with soft lights. All right, I'm Andrew Locke. See you on the next episode of Gaffer and Gear. Take care, everyone.